Good evening, everyone, and hope you're all well. Welcome to another round of the Whisky Lounge virtual tastings. This week, we're very blessed and fortunate to have friends from the lovely world of elixir distilling in the form of the Single Malts of Scotland, which has been around for longer than I care to remember, to be honest. We're delighted to have Julie Hamilton, the brand ambassador for Elixir Distillers, and also Ollie Chilton, who you can blame for putting these whiskies together. But we're very pleased to have both of you aboard. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Surviving, I think. Yes.
Just got a couple more coming in now. So obviously, you guys put together and market these whiskies and sell them around the world. So I'm not going to say too much right now. What I will do is, if anybody has any questions throughout the tasting, please do ask them via the chat board at the bottom. I'll tap a little message in there now, and you can see how that works. Write your messages, questions here. Okay, so Julie, what are we going to start with here?
So tonight we're going to start with a nice little easy Clynelish 8-year-old. So the reserve casks, sorry, I'm just kind of launching into telling you what they are. Reserve casks are from our Single Malts of Scotland range. So until this year, Single Malts of Scotland has been single cask single malts, but this year we've released in parcels, we've released the Single Malts of Scotland Reserve Cask series. So these are very small batches, and the first one that we're going to try tonight is 5 casks of Clynelish. Have you have, wonderful. I'm just checking that you're letting me share my screen. So I shall show you what this is like.
Yeah, just to note, guys, that the tasting mat has been printed kind of in the reverse that we would normally do. So the back 2 or back 3 are the first 3, and the front 3 are the next 3. Just to
just to confuse everybody.
Just to clear that one up.
Did you number the drums, or did you just kind of randomly put them on there?
They're in order in the box. I mean, you know.
It's a good thing this isn't a drinking event, right? With people drinking alcohol and getting confused easily.
They were in order in the box. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and they're in order on the tasting notes in the insert, as you've seen, in the fold out. So all the clues are there.
Okay, so this here gives you a little bit more information about these casks. So across the series of reserve casks, we've bottled them at 48% ABV. Nice drinking strength, but also you've got a little bit of scope to add some water as well. So let's give them a go.
Mine smells like the more.
You're cheating, aren't you? Everybody will be saying, all these whiskies look an awful lot darker than mine. Like, so do people get to contribute to this, Eddie, or is it just chat?
We just get to talk at them, I think.
They can maybe contribute at the end if they behave themselves.
I see. There's someone in the room here. Will I just let them in?
Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, that's fine. I see. I'm now understanding the co-host thing. That's good.
So one of the things on this sheet, guys, just so you know, it says 8 years. There's actually 2 different vintages we used for this. So it's 2010 and 2011. The 2010 was younger, if that makes any sense in the world. We were basically doing a bottling for some friends. Never work with friends or animals. They're pretty much the same, in my personal opinion. And they...
That was just a wee insight to who your friends are then.
Yeah. And they asked us to take a couple of casks of Clynelish 2010 out of casks, so we did at 8 years of age, and then they never bottled them. So I sat with them for about a year before going, okay, I've got to do something. And luckily we had some really lovely 2011 barrels, all first fill barrels. They're all sitting at 9 years old. So we racked those with the 8-year-old whiskey we had, and that's the parcel you've got there. So it's 2 barrels from 2010 and 3 barrels from 2011. And the 2011 are all 9 years old, and the 2010 are all 8 years old. Nothing like confusion.
Yeah. Well, you always love to keep us on our toes.
Oh, it goes with your tasting sheet, the wrong order.
Okay. I'm just going to go and get some water.
Nothing like being organised, Ludlow.
For those who don't know, Eddie is currently hiding where he's staying in the world, and he's given a really lovely insight right there.
I don't think you're allowed to say where he's hiding.
Yeah,
You're going to get me into trouble.
I guess going back a little bit, so Single Malts of Scotland, as Eddie said, has been around since 2002.
2002.
Yeah, Julie's read all the stuff I should. And as Julie said, it was originally single casks. It was actually, the first one was a Tomatin 30-year-old, which was for sale for bugger all money because it was 2002 and you could do that back then. And it was, it's the start of our business. It's basically a hobby. I always think of it as a hobby. So Sukhinder Singh, who owns our business, owns a small shop known as the Whisky Exchange. And on the side, he used to buy casks and bottle them and sell them to his friends, mainly in Europe. So Germany and Japan were actually our first customers. And for a long time, that's what he did. And then he did kind of small batches in, I think around 2005, he did some small batches, 2005 to 2010-ish, but he never labelled them up. It was like, it's always difficult to tell exactly what was going on. There's some wonderful whiskies if you go and find them. They cost bugger all. You can find them at auction for peanuts. Please don't buy them. I'm buying them.
What did he label under, Ollie, at that time?
They were labelled under Single Malts of Scotland. They all had exactly the same label.
Okay.
But the batches were all 46%, and the
right.
And then the single cask were all cask strength. And I think the batches had silver foiling. Important difference.
Okay.
And the single cask had gold foiling.
And gold foiling.
It was back when single cask whiskey or independent bottling whiskey was a much simpler and more wonderful place.
Yeah.
Didn't even have boxes. I mean, like a lot of independent bottlers at the time, they bottled some, frankly, phenomenal whiskey for absolute nothing.
Small amounts of money, yeah, absolutely.
And it's because the whiskey was available. Like, it was easy to buy. There was so much whiskey sitting around. Nowadays, it's a little bit more challenging. And as Julie says, we launched this range this year, kind of end of last year. So it's been around for about a year now. And it was mainly because the biggest problem with single cask whiskey is it pisses everyone off. Like, long and short of it is, if you like a whiskey and it's from a single cask and you've only bought one bottle of it, chances are you ain't getting another one. And customers are great. They love you when they're happy, and they really get angry when they can't buy another bottle. They phone you up and shout down the phone. So we thought, we'll do batches of whiskey, and hence the reserve cask label that we came up with. And then when we got to strength, as Julie says, we do 48 because it's a good drinking strength. We have decided that because we drank a lot of whiskey at 48%. And worked out that we could drink a lot of whiskey, and that worked quite well for us. Yeah. I'd love to tell you there's a more scientific reason. I always loved the romance. I don't know, Eddie, do you remember Douglas Lang way back when, saying 50% was the golden strength. That was one of my favorite things I ever read. Is the golden strength.
The golden strength. Yeah, I know. Probably that would be a question on a lot of people's lips. Is why 48%? But you've just cleared that up for us. It's just a comfortable level to be drinking it at.
Right.
It's a measure of longevity for the drinking. It's at 48%.
I always remember Quarter Cask coming out. Lefroy Quarter Cask came out 2004, 5, 6, sometime around then, and that was 48%.
That's right. Yeah,
I remember drinking
A lot
copious amounts of Quarter Cask. So it's in my head. It's just something you can drink a lot of whiskey at, and I hope that reserve casks are always kind of good drinkers.
I think I've been doing quite a lot of tastings with them over the piece, just because we're doing everything virtually just now, and there are some of them that people are just like, oh, it doesn't need water whatsoever, and other ones that when I've been tasting these whiskies blind, they've thought that it was higher strength than the previous one, so some of them do palate a bit stronger than the others. The leash, I think if you put a couple of drips of water in it, it just opens it. It's really it's pretty whiskey.
Yeah, it's definitely not a kind of one size fits all with water, is it? I mean,
of course.
And actually this range just kind of cements that, really, doesn't it? Because like you say, you'll be tasting and nosing these at the same strength, but one or two of them will stick out as being as smelling stronger. There'll just be something about it. Will just so it's always good to taste and nose at full strength, and then go with the water, and then judge how much you need. But that Klein Leash is lovely, isn't it?
Yeah, it's lovely.
I mean, it's also kind of luck of the draw. So we bought these casks probably 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago now, and it was just it was part of kind of a big deal we were doing, and the blending company that offered them to us, and it was they're a big company, not Diageo. They don't sell Klein Leash, sadly. They offered it to us, and kind of like, oh well, we've got this as well, and it was one of those moments where I think Sukhinder and I had to look at each other and go, let's not sound too excited. Oh yeah, we could probably take that. Price a bit high. Half thinking to yourself, I'll never see anything like this ever again in my life. So we got enough to keep us going for a little bit longer.
Yeah. Was there sometimes a temptation to keep hold of it and bottle it a few years later when you maybe can charge even a bit more of a premium for it?
So we tend to buy. We're a Sukhinder Singh business, so we buy in a Sukhinder Singh manner. We don't tend to buy 1 or 2 casks at a time unless it's something special where that's all you're being offered. Quite often I'll be looking at parcels of 100, 200 casks, and my plan will be based on a 10 to 15 year plan. So I don't really see our job as just finding casks of whiskey and putting in a bottle and putting it out there. That's there's plenty of really good independent bottlers who do that. Who do a fantastic job. A lot of the smaller guys, like at the moment coming into the UK, you've got companies like Single Cask Nation. That's exactly what they do. I think they're buying slightly bigger parcels now. Mark Watts just started his business, and I've spoken to him quite a lot recently, and that's what he's doing. He's going out and tasting a cask, finding it, putting it in a bottle. That's basically the traditional model. What we've kind of gone down is the kind of close to maybe what G&M have done in terms of new spirit, but also buying bigger parcels and then managing it. So I always try to think that whatever we buy, what am I going to be doing in 10, 15 years time? And are we going to have enough stock to last us that long? And how will we manage that stock? And how will it develop? And do we need to recask any of it for it to last a bit longer? So in short, absolutely, Eddie, because I've got quite a lot of Klein Leash 2010 and 2011 stashed away for a rainy day. And we do make a bit more money as the years go on. That's absolutely true too. And there's nothing wrong with that. We pay a bit more rent. It's not astronomical, to be fair. But that's kind of the long game. You pay an investment now, and then you kind of manage that stock for as long as you possibly can. We've just got a slightly longer view than a lot of companies, predominantly because of our background. We're a family-owned retail shop at our heart, so that allows us a lot of freedom. We can rock up in the office and say, I want to try this, and it probably won't give us any money till 10 years time. And Skin always goes, oh, all right then. There we go.
I think it's it's safer when you're a more established company as well. So the newer guys that are coming on, like Mark's just starting out. So from his perspective, until things are building, then buying casks and bottling them are the way you go, aren't they? Really, it's
definitely, yeah. It's a safer economic route. And I'm certainly not disregarding it, because I think there's like from my perspective as a drinker, those are some of the best independent bottlers you'll find. You find someone whose palate you love, and that's who you buy from, and that's what independent bottling is about. And we're doing the same thing. It's just the only difference is we're also looking, okay, what if we take that cask and we age it for 10 years longer, or what if we take that and we move it into different wood? And the only real difference is the length of time we can afford to look at. And that is, for me, it's luck, right? I've just fallen into that. For Sukhinder, it's hard work and graft for 20 years. But it's just a case that we're fortunate to be in that position. It allows us a bit of freedom. Hopefully, it allows us to bottle better quality whiskey. Hopefully,
yeah, good stuff. Well, I don't know about everyone else, but I thoroughly enjoyed that Clynelish. I was quite intrigued that Julie, you chose this as the first whiskey to kick off the tasting. What was your thinking behind that?
I think it's a nice one to get started with. The one that comes after this is potentially a little bit lighter in profile, but I think the Clynelish is a nice one to start with. Whiskey number one in whiskey tastings is one that always kind of suffers a wee bit, because you're just getting warmed up with drinking. So if you throw one in that's really good to get everybody started, it's a nice way to begin, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a fair point. I mean, we you almost feel like you're chucking number one to the wolves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of, guys, give it a chance, and unless it's really outstanding, it very rarely does as well as the other whiskies later on in the tasting. So it's quite nice to see something really, really quite bold, because it is quite bold, isn't it?
Yeah. If anybody's able to hang on to a little bit of it to work back to,
I'll do my best.
In 3 drams time, it's interesting to go back to the it's excellent. Good man. Hang on to that. That's we'll come back to it. Good stuff. So we're ready to move on to dram 2, Eddie? Are you?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So the second one, I didn't really tell you very much about Clynelish. Clynelish, when it started, so I'm not moving on to dram 2 yet, but Clynelish, when it started, was so highly sought after that they didn't sell it to anybody, and it wasn't sold to blenders, and it wasn't, it was private investors that managed to get their hands on Clynelish. But over the years, more and more, they were starting to put whiskey into their whiskey into blends, and it's actually one of the whiskies that goes into Johnnie Walker Gold Reserve or Gold Label. But yeah, moving on. Glenelgan is dram number 2. So if everybody's managed to keep their whiskies in order, Glenelgan 12-year-olds. So this one, I've got all these in front of me so that I can look at the labels as I'm going along. However, I will share my screen. Sorry, this is talking and typing. I can't do talking and typing at the same time. That's terrible.
Is that what you're doing? I thought you had a moment.
I'm just throwing together these tasting notes. Just give me a second. So Glen Elgin, yeah, this one is a batch of 4 casks of 12-year-old Glen Elgin. So yeah, we've got some nice tasting notes against this one actually. This is
the bridge tasting notes are in the tasting pack. Shamelessly did a copy and paste of them because
okay. So everybody's got all of these then. So
not necessarily all of it,
I'll
but
just stop
certainly
sharing that.
just a tasting note.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're in fact.
Glen Elgin is another one of these whiskies that's loved by blenders. It is often tasted in White Horse, but it's also bottled as a single malt as well. It's they've actually still got the White Horse on the wall at Glen Elgin Distillery. But fruity is a fruity kind of character in Glen Elgin. And they achieve that through a long fermentation of a very clear wort and a really slow distillation process. So it's taking away all of the heavy elements out of the whiskey. So a lot of time spent on this one. But yeah, I think this is...
For me, it's one of my favourite Diageo makes. I think one of the funny things about being an IB is we get offered the makes that are not being bottled as single malt, right? So they're not being bottled as a big brand. That's not, because if they're bottling it as a big brand, they're making lots of money and they don't need you. So largely the makes you'll see bottled by independent bottlers will be the makes that you won't have brands associated with. And often I find myself, particularly with Diageo makes, writing a list that if I had my way, I'd just buy the distilleries, or I'd buy the whole company. Like if I could afford it, I'd buy Diageo, and then I'd just sack off Glenkinchie, right? Get rid of that. Get rid of Dahlia, and I'd replace it with Glen Elgin and Linkwood, because I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to drink Glen Elgin every day. It's just beyond me. Those two makes are just, they're among the best whiskies we get to work with day to day. As you say, it's really fruity as a character. So this is, from memory, it's all refill hogsheads. When you're buying stock like this, you don't always get the best cask information. You know, a lot of you guys, I'm sure you're whiskey fans, you'll expect to know exactly what happened to the wood and when and whatnot. Well, when you buy it, you get a big spreadsheet and it says you've got 1,000 litres of alcohol and it's in hogsheads. And that's it until you go to the warehouse and have a look at it and you scrape off the paint and you find out the hogshead's actually 30 years old and no idea what it held beforehand. But what you do discover out of that is there are certain makes, like Glen Elgin being one, where they're so flavoursome as a new make spirit, they can last in refill wood really well. They can deliver a phenomenal amount of flavour without vast amounts of wood interaction. So, Julie said the first whiskey's a lot fuller, but it's first fill barrels. It's really rich, really sweet. This is all refill wood, so all you're getting is new make. You're getting the flavours from the distillery, but the distillery just makes such a good spirit, such a fantastic spirit, and a consistently good spirit.
Well, this is the thing. This it's a highly sought after one from blenders. So when they're blending it into their blends, can you tell it's Friday? When they're blending it, it's not necessarily going to be particularly old. So I suppose that distillate quality is really important, isn't it?
For sure. I mean, for me, it's so effervescent, isn't it? There's someone, Nick Locke, commented that there seems to be a little fizz at first.
Yeah.
It is. There's kind of almost like a spritzy character to it. It's just lovely and bright and summery and lovely, isn't it? It's just it's a happy whiskey. It's making me happy. Or happy-go-lucky.
Absolutely.
Always happy, obviously.
I always think this is going to sound really arsey. Okay, so don't judge me. Please don't judge me. It's going to sound really kind of southern twatty of me. I taste a lot in colours, right? That sounds proper mental. So when I drink something, I quite often, one of the things I will experience is a colour. I think of the drink in a colour, and I don't write it down in poetry. Don't worry, I'm not that guy. Not yet, anyway. I'm getting older. Might happen to me one day. And I think of Glenelgan and this kind of whiskey as kind of this light green, like Granny Smith, kind of really kind of effervescent, rich, light green. And it kind of, that whole summery, happy-go-lucky feeling, Eddie. That's where I am with it. It's it's almost crunchy. Do you know? You can almost feel crunchy flavours.
It's very summery, I think, the Glenelgan. I think I'm similar. I do taste and colour as well sometimes. But the other thing that I used to experience when I was doing Scottish Malt Whisky Society was sometimes it would be like a picture, it would be a place. And I, sometimes struggled to get out of what the place was.
I bet it doesn't sound as wanky when you say it.
That's racist.
But it is, that's just, this is where it sounds a bit wanky, but it's just your olfactory, so what it links to in your memory. The Glenelgan's very green for me as well. I like it when I taste the same colours as people. My pal Peter and I are at opposite ends. Sometimes he can, for his pink, it's my yellow. So
he's colourblind.
Sorry?
He's colourblind.
Yeah. Synesthesia colourblind. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's really delicious, and I always say, it's one of the nice things about independent bottlers like yourselves is that you often get to taste little gems, and obviously Glenelgan is they make quite a bit of it, but you just don't see it bottled so often, and that's the opportunity with independent bottlers and uncovering whiskies that either you've never tried or maybe you've forgotten how good they are, and it's another one of those for me.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of what we bottle are whiskies that are pretty unusual like that are not in fodder for as opposed to single malt bottlings. Glenelgan is what we do bottle as a mainstream single malt, but it's not massive circulation of that.
It's not horrible. Box for a start.
What was that? What?
The packaging that time forgot.
I know.
I've never got near it. Thank God, please keep it that way for as long as possible.
Good stuff.
So this one makes you smile. Excellent. That's good.
Yeah. No, very much so. I'm trying to think of the song. Is it Golden Brown?
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? With the Fender Rhodes.
Yeah.
It's got that kind of summery, like I say, happy-go-lucky, very almost fairgroundy. It's fun fair. It's lovely. Yeah. Anyway, lovely. Should we move on to the next whiskey?
Thank you, Nicholas. That's the reason I put it up second, because I think it shows better after you've warmed your palate up with the Clynelish. Clynelish doesn't need warming up. This doesn't need it either, but it does help.
No, you definitely opened my eyes in terms of ordering of whiskies for sure.
This is where it all goes wrong. My first and then from here on in, everybody's like, no, don't get it, don't understand it.
But what's interesting now, I added about the same amount of water to the Glenelgan as the Clynelish, but I ended up having to add more to it because it wasn't quite giving me everything I needed. But it's now almost entirely transparent with only the merest hint of color.
Yeah. But
it just puts to bed the argument that the occasional myth that you hear when it's not dark enough to have any flavor to it.
Well, the thing I always say to people, so as a comment that I do get when I'm doing whiskey shows and things, people will say, "Oh, this is really clear," to which I hold water next to the whiskey and saying, "No, it's not." But anyway, we're not adding any colour into the whiskies, and they're not watered either. So we're leaving all the good stuff in, and we're not putting any of the bad stuff in on top of that as well. So the thing is, for people that colour is really important to, if we were to add E150 to all of these in degrees of shade, would people hold it up to the light and wax lyrical about how wonderful it is because of the colour? It's, you know, it's all...
no. Yeah. Plus, you could just drink Lagavulin off the still and then you'd realise there's a... I swear, we're after watershed. There's a fuckload of flavour.
Absolutely, and it doesn't need to be dark whiskey. I mean, I'm the chair of Glasgow's Whisky Club, and so we've got a committee, and we buy whiskies regularly. And one of the boys posted a picture of a bottle of whiskey the other night, and he said, "I know we're not meant to be raving about colour, but look at the colour of this one." I'm just like, you know, it's it might well. It might.
It's very difficult because we are very visual creatures.
Yeah.
And you know, we can't help but being attracted by colour and you know what we're seeing. And I think sometimes we're preyed upon by the distillers and the marketeers in that respect. You know, I think that undoubtedly that's a consideration when whiskey is being put into bottle for sale for some people, I'm sure. But yeah, that whiskey definitely puts to bed the argument that darker whiskey is better than lighter whiskey, if there is such a thing.
Absolutely.
But anyway, what are we on to next?
Next up. So next up we have a little 13-year-old whiskey this time. This one is from Benrinnes. Benrinnes Distillery is another Speyside, and another one of these distilleries that it produces a really highly individual make, but it's never become a frontline single malt, so it's one for the blenders again. This whiskey, actually, Ollie, this will be interesting. You'll be able to tell us about this. We've been having discussions because Benrinnes until 2007 were using triple distillation.
No, 1995, I think. It was earlier. I mean, they definitely used triple distillation in the 90s.
Yeah.
It's double distilled now, and I'm pretty sure this is double distilled. It's not triple.
Right.
It's
okay.
funny, mate, because it's actually quite heavy. Like nowadays, it's very heavy. It's quite meaty. It's quite thick.
So research that I had done was that it was 2007. But that again, like, what do you believe? You pull information from lots of different sources, so it's potentially a lot of rubbish. But
I think I had the same information. To be fair, Julie.
Yeah.
I always had it quite in the 90s. I stopped doing that, but I'm willing to be proven wrong.
not that that's what we're trying to do or anything.
I would always bow to your knowledge, Ollie. But the triple distillation just sounded so complex, and but it was producing a much heavier spirit. And then when they moved back to double distillation, it produced a lighter spirit. And we were having a conversation about it the other night on another tasting. I'm doing this most nights now, so I'm talking about these whiskies all the time. Like, but
no, you're not. This is you know.
This is a one-off. I've never tasted these before. That's. But the question was about whether whether the company thought that it had any influence from triple distillation, but I don't think it's heavy enough. So, but you're thinking it was the 90s, so it would have been way off for time.
So yeah, my understanding was it was the 90s. The thing is, it is difficult because triple distillation, theoretically speaking, should make spirits lighter, right? They should, because every time you distill something, you've got essentially the copper collecting heavier compounds, and you've also got any heavier compounds dropping back down into your still and then basically being taken out in your spent lees. So theoretically, a triple distilled spirit is a much lighter spirit. However, that being said, Mortlach, as an example, has the wee witchy and is 2 point something stupid distilled, and as is Springbank. And I don't think you'd accuse either of being light spirit.
Light whiskies.
I mean,
so the worm tubs must play a part in that then as well.
Yeah, they certainly would. Although, depending on how you use them, can change that. So if you've got cold water in your worms, you'll definitely get a heavier spirit. But you could pump hot water through them, like they do at Royal Not the Gar, and then you end up with a light. I mean, like without going into too much detail, you can use your kit any which way you want to produce whatever you like. A friend of mine who owns a distillery in the Netherlands once said to me, you know, if you're a good distiller, you just use it to make what you want. All of this, the still shape, all of this dictates the flavor. That's not true. The distiller dictates the flavor. That's, depending on how you've manipulated your kit, depends on what you make. Things like certainly when they talk about triple distillation, it's not quite the same certainly in most Scotch whisky production, outside of say Auchentoshan, that is just triple distillation. Like stuff like Mortlach, that's not the same. It's not comparable.
No.
It's complicated in terms of how they're describing it. It's not saying they're simplifying it by any stretch, but in terms of flavour profile, it's not the same as saying, it's like a triple distilled whiskey. My understanding is Benrinnes, largely up until about 1995, was always, since 1995, has always been thought of as a relatively heavy make, relatively sulfuric, quite a big character. Now, and certainly my experience of it as a make, like from the casks we get, I tend to find it works better in sherry. I tend to find it works better in more active wood and longer aging, which suggests it's a heavier make because it's got more sulfurs in it, and you don't really want those. I certainly, one of the things as an independent bottler, one of the things I've discovered, like as a whiskey enthusiast, as a whiskey fan, that really interests me is vintage is probably one of the most important things, right? Because like you're saying, 2007 they changed production, and I'm thinking 2005 they changed production. The reality is they probably change production every single year, one way or t'other. Like, because someone will come in and they'll change something small, and it seems insignificant. And every marketing company paid by a distillery will tell you it didn't change anything. We didn't change anything. No, we didn't change the flavour. Of course you didn't. But they did. And some of the compounds, because the way it works is distillation. You're concentrating something. That's what distillation is, right? You're concentrating compounds down. You're altering some compounds. You're concentrating others, and you end up with a spirit with a set of chemical compounds in it, and then you stick that in wood, and the wood acts on it. You also get those compounds changing with oxygen. You get compounds leaving. So all of these changes happen, and the end result is every year that you make a small change to a distillation, one or two of those compounds is now changing during maturation, and it's going to change in a different way to the way it did the year before. So every little change you make actually can make a larger change. And frankly, you don't have control over that. And that's before you get into wood technology. So it becomes very difficult, almost.
I was going to say, we'll leave that for Dram 4, the wood technology then.
Right. It becomes difficult. It becomes almost impossible to sit there and say, Benrinnes tastes like this. Or unless you've got overarching flavors, like Clynelish has an overarching flavor. It has a one particular flavor camp, one particular flavor compound that people talk about. They talk about it being waxy. and it's so overbearing in the spirit, which is why it's so sought after. Right? It's used. I know you said it was used in Gold Label. It's used across all Diageo's blends.
Yeah.
It's so heavily protected because they can't recreate the character. They cannot recreate that single character anywhere in their portfolio. 27 distilleries. That's mental. Right? So when you look at something like Benrinnes and you say, okay, the distillate's changing, there's definitely a change in the 90s. You can see it, you can feel it. Early 90s Benrinnes is a different thing to late 90s Benrinnes. These casks, 2007?
2007, yeah.
I found they were really hit and miss, like being completely open. Like we got a big parcel of them. Some I've literally sat there and said, right, we're not going to look at that for another 5 years. It's not even point. There's actually a parcel from 2000 and I want to say 8 that we've recast all of it because it's really heavy and the wood's shite. So we just re-racked it. And again, we just forget about it. And largely from a personal point of view, I probably wouldn't look at bottling Benrinnes until it's a bit older, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. That being said, one of the great things about being an independent bottler is you're looking at casks individually, right? So every now and again, there's always a diamond in the rough. There's always something a bit special.
Yeah.
And that's our job, is to find those things that are a little bit different, a little bit special. That didn't answer any of your questions, did it, Julie? That was terrible. I just spoke for a very long time.
I forgot what the original question was, to be honest.
That's what I'm going for.
See, well, the thing is, when you say that, it doesn't matter what your kit is, it's the distiller that's making the difference, yet they can't recreate Clynelish.
So there's a few things going on there. One, they're pretty sure that the flavour profile is brought on by, I'm going to say filth, because it sounds brilliant when you say it. It
does sound better if you describe it as filth, yeah.
Just utter filth. They don't clean out the faint tanks. And it's created this green gunk. And one of the things that happens at distilleries is over time, right? Over time by not cleaning it, or over time by doing something particular all the time, that creates a character. Right? That's now particular to the distillate. How do you recreate that somewhere else? Well, you wait a very long time.
Take some of the filth with you and just put it into somebody else's.
Apparently they did try it. I've heard they did actually try taking some of the green filth out of Clynelish and sticking it into Ord, I think it was. But then you've still got to wait, right? You've still got to wait for it to age.
Well, that's right. That's right. You've got a long time. It's not an experiment that you can do quickly. Yeah, absolutely.
I actually know that a lot of the big companies do these experiments regularly. They do lots of experiments that they don't tell us about.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
So maybe they have.
Well, Douglas Murray, obviously, and he's a top fiddle-abouter with whiskey and whiskey making, isn't he? He loves tinkering with these. I mean, I remember him trying to explain the distillation process at Mortlach using condiments, salt and pepper mills and odds and ends, and we were at the end of it. We were all like, huh?
More confused than when you started.
Yeah, exactly,
absolutely.
Exactly. And I think some, it's great to know and to see it on paper, but sometimes it is just let it be good. You don't need to know exactly everything behind it. Just enjoy it,
One of the problems is that you're trying to explain something that is, in one sense, making whiskey is very simple. We've got 3 ingredients, and you turn it into spirit and you put it in wood. That's simple, it's clean, it's easy to understand. But you're talking about the manipulation of hundreds of compounds that create flavor, right, over a period of and largely over a decade. So actually, you want to understand what happens to all those compounds. That's really complicated. That's really complex. And the biggest problem we have in whiskey is we're talking to now hundreds and thousands of people, and they all want to know everything. And we've got these, as long as none of them are listening, we've got these marketeers in the middle who are desperately trying to make it easy for everyone. And what they do is they miss off all the subtlety, because you have to, because to make it simple, you miss off all the subtlety. But before you know it, you're standing in a room, almost certainly in my case in Germany or Sweden, and there's a guy pulling you apart because you got it wrong. And as you say, Eddie, you kind of want to say, well, can't you just enjoy it? But you know what? Marketeers start the bloody conversation. You know, you'll remember, Eddie, from Ardbeg with peat and all this fucking nonsense about phenols. I mean, it's such bollocks. It's such heart-wrenching bollocks. Marketeers start the bloody conversation, so now everyone wants to have it. Well, fine, but let's get into the detail. And suddenly it's not as simple as saying.
It's not quite as romantic either when you've got spreadsheets out showing people comparing information with things.
Someone else find romance in a spreadsheet like that?
Well, I'm sorry, I forgot who I was talking to. That's true.
Well, you know, that is, you know, the marketeer's role, to be fair to the poor fuckers. I mean, people. But yeah, I mean, what tends to happen is, and particularly, you know, going back to Ardbeg, and you know, they would look at it in a very flat way. You know, think, right, what's interesting about this brand, not this whiskey, this brand, and you know, how do we then maximize? And then you need to
tie the whiskey in to that.
Exactly. And Ardbeg, and obviously one or two others, it's peat. You know, peat. Now, how do we explain peat? You know? and then before you know it, you've got very young, still young, blah blah blah, and it was.
How do we explain peat? And then all of a sudden, you've got a peat cutter on a screen trying to talk about what his work is. And
then you've got a friggin' Harley Davidson trike with
absolutely next to your bus.
I mean, like you take that kind of thing as an example, and it's the extension of the same thing to do with distillation, Julie. It's like we were up on Isla a few years ago, and Colin Gordon, who's now the distillery manager at Ardbeg, he used to run the maltings at Port Ellen. He's become a really good friend. I remember going around the maltings with him. Apart from the fact that the fire alarm was going off and it was setting fire, which was hilarious, he said to me as well, you know, we kind of do our best to get the phenol levels they want, and when you see it on paper, it's always very accurate, and then when you speak to the maltings, they're like, well, it's not that accurate. I mean, it's kind of a bit of chance, you know, and if the weather doesn't fall quite right, we're not going to get the smoke they want. So therefore, we're not going to get the phenol compounds they want. So then we deliver the best. He always used to say that the Port Ellen maltings delivered the best to their customers who weren't Diageo distilleries, so Ardbeg, Kilhome and Lefroy. Ironically, when you spoke to the guys at Ardbeg, Lefroy and Kilhome, they said the best went to the Diageo distilleries. So, you know, pretty sure that they were just lying in the middle of going, you're all getting shit, but you just have to deal with it. And then you go to someone like Andrew Brown up at Bunnahabhain, who's probably one of the most interesting distillery managers I've ever had the chance to spend time with. And he tells you, as a distillery manager, your job is to look at all of the variables, which is everything, and adjust your kit to try and make the same thing you did last time. Yeah. And then you start to understand this is a horribly complex process. And we're only looking at the bottle stock after 13 years later. And then we're trying to work out, well, what they did 13 years ago, which we're assuming is the same thing as they did last year, what difference did it make? And it's
and as you say, Ollie, like one tiny alteration in the whiskey making process in 13 years' time could be glaring by comparison to the other one next to it.
But that's why independent bottling for me is the kind of
the best bit.
The best of it, the be all and end all, because you get to enjoy that. You get to enjoy those exaggerations.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, not having to follow any particular recipe and DNA that distilleries have to do, and their master blenders have to combine all these things to make things consistent. Not having to do that is the beauty of independent bottling as well.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
Good. Well, I think a lot of good comments about the Ben Rinnes. It's ticking all the boxes. It's a nice evolution from the Glenelgan as well. Just a little bit darker in color palette wise, if that makes sense.
No,
from green to maybe a autumnal
olive
brown or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there you go. That was dram 3.
There you go.
There you go.
Oh, very
got
nice.
3 more to go, Judy. Don't give up yet.
No, absolutely. So we'll move on to drum 4, shall we?
Yep.
There's a few questions coming through, but I'm thinking.
Well, go do that then. Let's all enjoy where Ben Rinnes, and let's answer some questions then.
Well, your very own Angus has asked, Ollie, in your opinion, who's new and making great whiskey these days?
It's a $1 question, Angus. Well
No,
done.
it's not no one. That's not. I mean, it sounds awful. Doesn't want to blow my lips out like that. I think there's a lot of. Firstly, there's a difference between making great spirit and making great whiskey, because those are very different things, right? If you ask me purely about spirit, I'm very lucky. Two of my close pals are Simon and Phil up at Dornoch Castle, and they send me spirit samples, and I think their spirit's wonderful. But they come from a whiskey obsessed background, so they're obsessed with making something. Right? They're aiming to make something, which is a great way to be. And similar to what Judy said, we don't have to be consistent as an independent bottler, and they're not really aiming for consistency currently. They're looking to make something great and then consistently repeat it. That's
the contrary, actually, isn't it? It's
so that it gives them a lot of freedom because they're independent. There are loads, and I mean loads of really good whiskies from young distilleries, largely because there was a pure genius in Dr. Swan who gave them all a recipe, and they all now make very good whiskey. And from that, I'd say like one of my all-time favourites currently is Kilhoman. Okay, I'm Islay obsessed, obviously. I genuinely think Anthony Wills is making one of the best spirits out there. I think the whiskey they have ended up producing is excellent. It's really drinkable, right? Beyond, it's not as like, and this is the other side. Everything has to be caveated. Is it Bemore 68, 69? No, of course it's not. Right? I'm not saying they're saying it's comparable to that. It's really drinkable.
People will be comparing them in years to come, and they'll be saying, I mean, is it a Kilhoman? No, but it's, because
that's possibly true. And there's certainly some really good younger distilleries producing good whiskey. I think it's what becomes tricky is the extremities of the 60s and the 70s, which is the more you get into whiskey, the more you end up comparing stuff to the bottlings from the 80s and the 90s, and some of the stuff that I was very lucky to start in the industry in the early 2000s, when frankly the best bottlings were appearing for pennies. I was very lucky to start in that time, and I've been very lucky to work for a company who encourages us to drink those whiskies now. You have to remember that they came out of a period where everything was up and down. So there were great things and there were really terrible things, and we largely don't have the terrible things anymore. We have some mundane stuff, but we don't have terrible. I think nowadays we probably don't get the extremities that we had then. There are some younger distilleries coming through, and I really hope in the next kind of 10 years we'll start to see those guys, like the guys at Dornoch, whose obsession is, how do I make spirit that will make whiskey like Bemore 69. How do I do that? And to give an example, Simon actually sent me a message at 3 a.m. one night because he's mental, saying, I've done it. I've made Bemore 64. I mean, that's the kind of obsession that's really lovely to see. But on a day-to-day basis, for a young distillery, I'd say Kilhoman really steps out. I think it's superb. I think some of the English distilleries are doing a fantastic job. Obviously, we're all biased, but Joe Clark's done a very good job at Spirit of Yorkshire, because he's not listening. He's in the pub. That's bullshit.
He doesn't even like whiskey.
I'm not telling that story tonight. But yeah, so I think things like that are really impressive. Also Chichabu, but similar. Chichabu, it's the obsession with whiskey, it's the obsession with flavour.
Yeah. Anyway, there's plenty of time for more chat later on. So, shall we hit number 4?
Let's do it.
What have we got, Julie?
So number 4 is a 12-year-old Linkwood. Now,
Julie, you've gone a bit quiet.
Yeah, your speaker's
Sorry.
gone. Your mic's gone.
better?
No.
What's happened?
I don't know. You haven't covered the mic or something?
No, I haven't changed anything, is it?
Oh. Well, maybe everyone has to just turn their volume up. And then suddenly, bang!
I've been talking really quiet. I don't think I just muted myself there, but no,
Yeah, no, that hasn't done anything.
Just shout. You're in Glasgow.
No, just enunciate and project. Yes. Can you hear me enough?
Just about. If none of us talks, you should be all right.
Yes, enough. Thank you, Agnes. Okay, so, well, you've got the yellow box. I'm not picking up the microphone. That's what the problem is. For some reason, it's stuck on Eddie, but I'm not picking up the microphone. Why would that be?
It's okay. We can hear you and see you.
Yeah, okay. There you go. I've got it now. So the 4th drum is Linkwood. This one is 12 years old. This is from parcel 2 of our reserve casks. This was a vatting of 4 casks of Linkwood. You have all got these, but I can just show you. I think, interestingly, on this, I think the tasting note on this one's actually very precise. Not that I don't think the rest of them are very precise, but I think the tasting note on this one's very good.
You mean it's short, Julie?
It is short, but sometimes that's good.
You think that's because I did it?
I think the palate, the description of tea in the palate is very good on this one. And chocolate limes as well. So yeah, 2007 Linkwood, this one is. That, again, oh, that's not what I want. The Earl Grey tea, sorry. I'm getting all my screens mixed up. We didn't talk about the labels on the reserve casks. So you can see, I'm just going to go back to the share screen again. Sorry, I've got my screens mixed up there. The labels that you can see here, I'll just move us over. So they're a little bit like sample labels. So this one, weirdly, Ollie, this is something that I found as well. The angel share in the actual bottle isn't the same as the angel share on the label here in the photograph. So nice little facts, kind of fun fact on the label we put on is the angel share. So across the 4 casks, it's 24.33% angel share. But yeah, I think there's...
It's a right pain in the ass to do that.
It's a calculation, isn't it?
We did it because, well, it's not the calculation. That's not the biggest problem. The problem is you have to bottle it first.
And then work it out.
You've got to know how many you got out of it, right? So we only did that because there's a really famous bottling for a bar in Japan. And for those that haven't been, by the way, and I realise now is not the time to go. When it's all over and it returns to normal and you're allowed to hug people, hug the person you love, buy a ticket to Tokyo and leave them and go to a bar, because it'll be the best experience of your life. The whiskey bars over there are mental, and there's a very famous bottling over there which basically the label was very long and had all this detail on it, including the angel share. And Segundo loved it. He used to say to me, I just want to do it. I just want to do it. So we decided to put it on before we thought how difficult it would be to batch a load of casks together and figure out what the angel share was, which is relatively painful. But still, it's a bit of fun. And it tells you how much you lose, which it sounds a lot, 24%. It's not too bad. Actually, in reality, it's
across 4 casks, I suppose that's not too bad, actually.
And also, angel share is a funny thing. I always figured it was just, when you deal with companies, loss is just what you're losing for evaporation. Angel share includes when you've got a broken cask and it leaks all over the floor. I mean, that's a pretty bad conversation to be having. Well, it's natural loss. Like, natural loss is not it's missing a slave. That's not natural.
When the wood falls apart, surely that's a natural loss, is it not?
Yeah, my favourite ever letter I've ever had from any warehouse was they sent me a letter saying, "We're really sorry, we found your cask empty because it was missing the hoops." Like, away with bits of wood.
Just straps of wood. I wonder what was holding it together, a bit of string or something.
I've seen some interesting things, actually. I've seen some. My favourite actually was Kurosawa. I saw a piece of metal holding a cask of Kurosawa together. It had an interesting green tint to it.
My goodness. When you think, so my only experience of going and tasting casks to put into bottlings is our Portiskeag 12-year-old. And the one that was a low fill and it tasted like smoky peach juice. And I was really wanting to roll that out and take it with me. But yeah, it was really interesting at 12 years old, that low fill in a cask. You expect it to be older whiskies that you're going to get.
Yeah, it's just because there's a really great big hole in it.
Yeah, that's going to do it, isn't it?
But the flip side is, as you said, Julie, it tastes very different because you've got so much oxygen, which Eddie, your friend who used to work for the Scotch Whisky Research Institute, denies. Oxygen plays a part in the maturation. I want to throttle him sometimes.
You're not the only one.
You just want to show them these casks which are just full of air, and the flavour profiles so radically different. They're so fruity, so much fruit, and it makes such a difference to when you're putting stuff together.
But that's one of the fascinating things about whiskey as opposed to unaged spirits is that's still very unquantifiable mystery that happens in the cask. As much as we do know, there is a hell of a lot more we don't know.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Think that happens when the lights go out? You mean that bit?
What when the warehouseman sneaks in and
when the warehouse lights go out?
So I've got
a hole in
my head of being on Isla, and I was actually there the day after, and we were staying at the Moor Cottages for this big Isla kind of gathering of whiskey enthusiasts, shall we say. It was a bit of filth. Mark actually was on the call, provided the whiskey that we all drank. I've still got a bottle of it. And the boy, you say after the lights went out, all the boys set off the fire alarms in Bemore warehouses when they went down to do a barbecue at midnight. What happens when the lights go out? That's why all the Bemore 2013s will taste of barbecue, I think. Barbecue, yes.
What happens on Isla stays on Isla.
Absolutely, 100%.
I'll remind you that on Wednesday. In terms of this whiskey, the Lakewood, Linkwood is by far and away, I said it earlier, it's becoming one of my favourite makes. Like I could just drink gallons of it. I'm yet to find a bad way of it being expressed. You know, it works so well in sherry. It presents so well in these refill hoggies. We've got some bourbon barrels that are mental. We've got some casks which has my favourite cask description I've ever discovered. It's called New Wood. I've yet to understand what new wood means. You'd think it's virgin oak, wouldn't you? It sounds like virgin oak, only it's not.
No.
They don't quite know, so they've just put new wood on it. Because some of them turned out to be wine casks when they rocked up. That was an interesting day. And I
think it's like a kind of new to you thing. It's like you don't know what's new. That's like.
Well, a friend of mine who worked with us for a little bit used to work in Diageo marketing, and she tried to do a list of all the cask types at Diageo, and her problem became that she discovered that everyone who wrote down the cask types had a different list. So there's like 15 different interpretation of wood.
Yeah,
list of casks. So you end up with these ridiculous expressions that, you know, if you're trying to tell people what it is, you're like, well, it's about the shape of a hogshead, but it's slightly longer and it
smells a bit different.
Oh, and it says Gonzalez bias on it, but we're not calling it a sherry hoggy. You know, it's absolutely mental. But these
back in the days when Gonzalez Baez were doing a wee experiment with making bourbon, that kind of thing.
But these casks were just really lovely, drinkable, kind of, again, quite happily. I get kind of pears and a bit of pineapple off this kind of whiskey. One of my favourite tasting notes is a Serge Valentine tasting note. I kind of want to make this. In fact, because I can now see Mark front and center of my screen, this is a project for us. Pineapple cider. Anyone else want to make pineapple cider? I mean, it needs to be done.
No.
I imagine it would taste like this.
If you can make pineapple cider that tastes like this, I will buy into that project. Yeah, absolutely.
I think Mark had his hand up, so I'll let
take
him.
My money, absolutely.
I'll bring him in a bit later when he's ready.
Once he's good and drunk, get him in.
I didn't say that. You said. So what do we all think of the Linkwood? Everyone, did you enjoy it? Thumbs up or thumbs down, thumbs level, whatever.
I suppose that's the most important thing, isn't it?
What thumb?
Whether you like it or not, it's thumbs. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a really simple cask selection system where we write really complicated tasting notes involving ticks. So I have a 1 tick, 2 tick, and 3 tick system. If it doesn't get a tick, we don't bottle it. If it gets 1 tick, I offer it to someone I don't really like, and if it gets 2 ticks, we bottle it, and if he gets 3 ticks, the Kinder gets it.
So it's a 3 tick system.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, that's a thick of it thing, isn't it? Yeah. It was a 2 tick system.
That's right.
I knew there was something a bit Malcolm Campbell-esque about Ollie. Yeah.
Malcolm Tucker's about the place.
Malcolm Tucker. Sorry, wrong Malcolm. Oops. No, now I see it. Now I see it. Good stuff. Well, I have to say, of the 4 so far, even though I love them all, the Linkwood has gone down faster than the other 3.
Yeah.
that may have something to do with, you know, the fact that I've had 3 whiskies. And
I was going to say that might be a timing.
Is it also because you had to listen to our chat for quite a while now, so you're just drinking a lot?
We talked about bin runners for a fair while. Eddie's just been stanking them back.
Just numbing the pain, you know. No, but I think if this makes sense, of the 4, it's the most balanced, the most sort of rounded, crowd-pleasing whiskey, if you like. Whereas the others had sort of, I think, outstanding characteristics in their domain. This kind of seems to just really be very, very easygoing. You know, a real crowd pleasing whiskey.
It does make you think, if you were back in the 1980s and you were in that group of people selecting the classic malts, and you selected bloody Cragganmore for your Speyside, and you think, well, Linkwood's not that pretty. It's not pretty, but the whiskey's fucking phenomenal.
Yeah.
D&M, by the way, have just built the brand for you, so you know.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
You really do.
I think at this point, if you've still got whiskey left, when you go back and you taste the Clynelish and then the Glenelgan, they're completely round the wrong way now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but at the start, to warm everybody's palates up, it's quite different. But
you've got to start the tasting somewhere.
Well, that's right, and you're not going to start it with Kalila, so. But
well, I'm in a different room to you.
Well, unless you're doing a Kalila tasting, that's quite different then. But
yeah, unless you're doing a Kalila vertical, is
absolutely. Or you're doing Kalila and Ardbeg tasting. Yeah, you can maybe start it with Kalila. But I think if you go back and see 20 millibells, well, that might just be all it takes, eh? Absolutely.
Well, they all still smell good, I can tell you that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, they do stand up even after, so we're going in degrees of flavour, but yeah, I think it's interesting to see them the other way around.
I get a sort of smoky, pineapple-y, buttery note on the Clynelish now. It's really nice.
Oh, my goodness. Has it actually melted the bottle, Nicholas? Wow. Yeah.
Excellent stuff.
So, we're ready for Dram 5.
Highland Park.
It is indeed.
Orkney, sorry.
And Orkney.
And Orkney.
Come on.
And Orkney.
Yeah, and it's not Scapa. So
just so everyone knows, when we bought this stock, which a lot of people bought this stock around the same time, and it's sold as an Orkney malt. Some of the vintages, Scapa wasn't even bloody open. I mean, it's not even is there any point in trying to hide it?
It's not rocket science. Yeah.
It's the principle, Ollie. It's the principle.
Absolutely. So this harks back to the halcyon days of Parcel 1. This was the first release of the reserve casks that we did. I'm just going to... Sorry, I'm doing that talking and typing thing again. I can't do it.
We are about to do another one, just so everyone knows, in case you can't find this bottle.
Absolutely. So this one is... Well, I think you'd found it in Hard to Find, Eddie, hadn't you?
I think that's where I found it. Yeah.
It took you a while because it was quite difficult, but hard to find. I thought this was all but gone, the Orkney, so that's...
Well, I don't know how much they have or how much anyone has, but I know you said it was just about done.
Yeah. So a very small angel share in this one. It's 6.8%.
So there's a bit of a story there, because it kind of gives you a lovely insight and telling you all the things you're not supposed to know right now. Okay, so
no, I hope people aren't writing things down. That Angus will be writing all this down.
A lot of the time when you do these deals, right, and they ask you, you buy litres of alcohol. We buy everything in litres of alcohol. You don't buy bulk. No one ever asks for 100 bulk litres of whiskey. You ask for 100 litres of alcohol. So when these parcels were offered out, what they did was they took all of the whiskey they had in wood and they put them into a big vat and they sell them to you as many litres of alcohol as you want to buy, right? And then they have to put them back into wood to age on. But there's a funny thing in Scotch whiskey that when you're taking it out of wood, right, it stops aging, and then they put it back into wood and it starts aging. So it gets a new, what's called AYS, right? So basically the year it starts, its new birthday. and you add the old age to the new age. But if you ask for the angel's share, you only get from the point at which its new birthday was. So in this case, 2018.
I didn't realise that. There you go.
2018. I have no idea what it lost before then because they vatted it together.
40% or something like that.
Yeah. So we when we bought these, we actually re-racked everything into our own wood because I was in a fortunate position that I could do that. So I wasn't relying on them racking it into whatever wood they wanted to sell me, because we've done that before, and it was a bit of a painful process because we realised they put it into really shit wood. As you would, it's a bit like selling a house or a car, sold as seen. You all bought a car and found out it didn't have an engine in it. That's what basically would happen. You can buy 1,000 litres of this lovely spirit and we'll put it into really dodgy woods, and after 6 months you're going to get something terrible. But we don't care because the wood cost us nothing. So what we did instead, having been burnt before, we sent our own wood up for this. So we're about to do another parcel with a slightly different vintage, but similar whiskey, same Orkney, Highland Park. This time into Miguel Wood after 2 years. It's black as the night, so some people who love colour will really enjoy it. It's definitely a very different flavour profile. But that Angel's Share really threw us, because obviously we put Angel's Share on the label and then I bottled it. It came out at 6.8%. Someone's going to notice.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, no one noticed until we got to France, and then everyone noticed. I was like, really? This one's 25, this one's 6. Yeah.
Well, I must admit, when I tried it without water, I found it a bit challenging and not, just a bit tight, tight packed. Whereas a few drops of water have just opened it up beautifully, and it's just so multifaceted. It's just got a lovely complexity, which is currently delighting my taste buds.
I wonder if that's to do with the fact that the stuff we had in hogsheads, we didn't dilute. So some of the stock, when we recast it, we actually diluted the cast stock. Highland Park's loaded in at some horrendous strength into wood, which is, for me, why everyone knows Highland Park 18 historically. I say historic because we went for a period where it was shit, but historically was one of the go-to whiskies. Yeah. I've heard it's really good now. I've not actually bought it, but I need to buy a new one. But I remember when I started, Highland Park 18 was one of the whiskies you went to. It just pure quality. And I was speaking to a friend in the US who deals in bourbon, and they were talking about ABV into wood, and they were saying, look, at high ABV you're going to extract a lot of tannins, you get a lot of these kind of very heavy notes, and then at a lower ABV you extract more water solubles that carry them, the sugars essentially carry the vanillins and make them sweeter. So theoretically, if you have something that's filled in at very high strength and then you age for a long time, as the ABV drops, you start to extract more water solubles, and you suddenly get an incredibly balanced whiskey with a backbone, because you've got all these tannins in the background, right? So the examples of that are things like Diageo's rare malts, which were all filled in at 70-something%. Yeah. And if you look at the strengths, they're incredibly high, but they're incredibly balanced whiskies, structured with sweetness, but they're also all 20-odd years old. Yeah. Highland Park's basically the same. It just needs a phenomenally long time because it's filled in at a high strength. So you're pulling all these tannins from the wood, which creates structure, which is a fantastic thing, but you don't have any sweetness. So as it gets older, you get something more interesting. So when we bought the stock, we actually lowered some of the ABVs. We basically racked some stuff to get to still sugar, right? I'm being completely honest. We were like, well, we want to bottle some of it sooner, so we'll lower the ABV and make it sweeter. This stuff we didn't. erect in a high strength. And I wonder, you know, Eddie, as you say, you add a bit more water and it comes alive a bit more. Maybe that's part of the reason. We're still learning, right? We're studious, working very hard by drinking lots. But it certainly, I think that's an area of maturation that's not explored enough, like what you can do with water to change how it works with wood, to change how you present. And we're doing a few experiments at the moment exactly along those lines, because frankly, in my dream world, if that works, what you do is you say, I'm going to bottle this whiskey at 5 years old or 10 years old, and I'm going to fill it in at this strength and it's going to shine. But this whiskey I'm going to bottle at 18 years old, so I'm going to fill it in at 68%. Now on this one I'm going to bottle at 30, so I'll fill that in at full off the still 70%. In my head, that works. I hope it does in reality. Otherwise the Kindle will really shout at me in about 30 years time.
Well, yeah, we'll see. We'll see in 30 years how many of us are still about.
All of it. Making whiskey, it makes you live forever.
Really? Okay.
Absolutely. I can just visualize you and Sikander shouting at each other in 30 years. I'll be like, what?
Is that just because that's what happens now, Julie?
That'll be worth hanging about to see, I'm sure.
I know this is probably just a very what's the word, mute point, but it's funny. I've added water to all of the whiskies, and some of them have thrown a little bit of a haze, but the Highland Park seems to throw more of a haze than the other four. And I don't know if that's just my eyesight or whatever it is, but it's quite interesting.
Water's actually almost suspended in it, like it's yeah.
So my understanding, that's all to do with the compounds in it, and you've got slightly heavier compounds. Like we've got we bottled some lead check from 2005 from sherry. You bottle it at cast strength and it comes out cloudy, which is one of my favorite things you've ever seen. When you're like, they send you down a bottle to put into samples to send out to press, and they're like, yeah, it's a bit hazy. Great. What do we do? And you go, well, we're going to have to put it through a filter, and we're going to have to correct this somehow. And it's just because all the compounds in it are so thick and heavy, and I mean, lead check is filth. It's utter wonderful filth. It's for every human being who secretly quite likes them being whipped.
I wonder if Distell will put that in their next marketing bump. You know, Ollie Chilton says lead check is a wonderful filth.
It's like when they do the little press statements, and it'll be like utter filth, Ollie Chilton.
You have no idea. If they gave it to me, I'd sort it all out. I'd just go after the full, you know, PVC market. Being so every night, and I'd sell so much whiskey.
It's maybe an idea for a new bottling, like Tobermory Filth, and if we do a really nice dick to Fox, that would maybe kind of balance out the kind of horrible title of it. But Tobermory Filth, yeah, I can see you selling that. That's that'll be an easy sell for the week.
He's writing all this down, Julie. On commission.
Mark, you can see him scratching his chin, going.
Don't do it, Mark. No, that was delicious, really.
That's a good one.
Shall we breach the final whiskey?
Mark suggesting copywriting Tobermory Filth.
Yeah.
Not a bad shout.
I think he means he's already done it.
Oh, he's done it. That was fast work. What? Fast work.
You just missed the E and the D at the end. That's it. It's gone. No, that was
so good. good.
You know how I said the fourth one I found really easy drinking? Well, the fifth one, the one that I finished. That's my kind of whiskey.
Brandon, oh God, Alex and Michelle, you're my favourite people. I was on the train yesterday, and I feel like if I turned up in a leather mask, I'd get much more attention. It'd be a lot easier for me to get a seat on the train.
Is that
With your
yes?
leather mask on, that's okay. Were you drinking Laychick at the time as well? Was that there's a theme starting to materialise here, Ollie? That's leather.
Red Bull as well. Just go to Pulp Fiction.
I've still got a few Cavalan branded masks if you want them.
Are they leather?
Well, they can be.
He's only going with the leather these days, Eddie.
We can make them leather for you.
Yeah. Okay, that's nice timing.
Yeah.
Drum number 6 then, shall we?
This gets out of hand.
So, yeah, absolutely. So this last whiskey that we're having is from parcel 2 of our reserve casks. So I have to keep lifting these up off the floor. That's an Orkney. Not done very well there at all. Here it's here. So yeah, parcel number 2. This is 10-year-old Kalila. Kalila is it's a whiskey that's quite close to our hearts in Elixir Distillers because we bottle Kalila under all of our labels. So we carry 3 brands in Elixir: Single Malts of Scotland, Elements of Islay, and Portuguese. And we bottle Kalila under all of these labels. And I think when I think about it, it is kind of safe to say I think this might be my favourite Islay whiskey, Islay distillery. But then I try something else and it all changes again. But Kalila just now is definitely what I like to drink from Islay. Kalila, I always say it shouldn't work because it's a big giant distillery, a big giant factory rather. 6.5 million litres of liquid a year comes out of the distillery. They don't do anything with it on the island other than make it, and then they take it off the island in metal tankers and fill it into casks and mature it on the mainland. But the quality of the whiskey that's been produced in this distillery and the distillate that comes out of the stills is of such high calibre that you're hard pushed. I think Mark just said something there about if you bottle a bad Kalila, you should give up. Absolutely.
I personally think he's wrong. You shouldn't give up. You should have to give up all of your cars.
Yeah, giving up's an understatement, isn't it?
I mean, I've tried one. And I didn't buy a bottle from the fecker who sent it to me.
I genuinely don't think I have had a bad Kalila. I used to do many moons ago at the tasting panel for SMWS, and I don't think we ever failed a Kalila. And we were tasting them blind. It wasn't, we weren't driven by brand at all. And yeah, it's consistently good juice that comes out of that distillery.
The only, sorry to interrupt you, Julie, the only Kalilas that for me have been slightly questionable tend to come from sherry casks. There's been one or two I've tasted where I've just thought that doesn't work, even though they're not necessarily bad, but it just doesn't work quite as well for me anyway.
I think it depends on the type of wood, Eddie. And you're absolutely right. If you get anything too active, it can swamp a very light spirit, which is a very light spirit.
Yes.
Someone's asked us which region Elixir's casks are stored in. All of them is the very simple answer. I mean, last time I checked, we were stored in 57 different bonded warehouses. We sadly do not yet own a warehouse. We are looking. And even if we did buy one, chance of us moving all our stock together is pretty remote because it would cost us a bloody fortune. But most of the Kalila that we own is stored either Edinburgh or Glasgow. But it kind of reminds me of a conversation I had years and years ago, which actually kind of, when I first met Eddie, he introduced me to a man named Colin Dunn, who you've probably all experienced at some point in your life. And if you haven't, you need to. I mean, everyone should experience Colin at least once.
If you've ever been at a festival,
Colin did me a lot of favours, and one of the favours he did me is he got me onto the Malt Advocates course with Diageo, which is largely, marketeers and whatnot, but they do a full week-long intensive course on whiskey, and you get to meet amazing people. And one of the people I met was the head of maturation for Diageo, and I asked him, I said, do you think being near the sea makes a difference to whiskey? And it's the best answer I've ever had to that question. And he kind of half laughed and he said, all of our whiskey is aged within 70 miles of the sea. And you could sit back and you could go, oh, that's quite close. Until you realise even fucking Northampton's within 70 miles of the bloody sea. I mean, like, you can't be in the UK and be that far away from the sea, which is actually more embarrassing about the amount of fish we eat. The proximity to the ocean makes bugger all difference. I don't think Glasgow's air makes the biggest difference to our Kalila, frankly.
Let's not
Glasgow's attitude probably makes a difference.
Let's not rule it out.
I definitely think that being a coastal distillery makes a difference to the style of whiskey because of the way it's produced. But I don't like the spirit makes a difference, but the maturation, the sea hitting the wall and impacting on the cask is all bollocks. But Kalila is definitely a coastal whiskey. You can taste it. It tastes kind of saline and salty. Hopefully you can get that in this.
Definitely.
Although this one was aged in Leith, so
yeah,
that made a difference.
That's probably closer than some.
As close to the water as it gets.
Maybe it was a different salty tang that came into it.
Leith salt. Yeah, that's my pet peeve is the whiskey matured by the sea. That's it.
Yeah. Well,
I do feel I always have to burst that bubble, but it's just because it's not there. People tasting the salt in whiskey as well. Yeah. You'd done a hell of a lot of water to deal with a drinking session on a salty whiskey, wouldn't you?
In terms of Kalila, like Julie said, we bottle Kalila in everything we do. We not surprisingly buy an awful lot of Kalila. Makes about a third of our cask stock, because I like it a lot. I like Islay a lot. Like Islay whiskey is the best whiskey, full stop, in the world ever. I'm sorry, it is. Like, anyone who thinks it's wrong, they can fuck off.
I was just going to say, in your humble opinion.
I'm not humble.
There's nothing humble about this opinion. Absolutely.
Should we get
Ireland's the biggest, as Julie pointed out, Ireland's the biggest distillery, so it's easy to buy a lot of it, but it's also very, very good. Kalila's the biggest distillery, so it's easy to buy. But one of the great things.
However, it's only about 15% of that liquid that stays in single malt.
Oh, it's mental.
So.
But when we come to buy bottling cask Kalila, one of my greatest joys is the fact that quite a lot of the time, like this kind of whiskey, I'll not only have tried the sample, I'll have tried it in the cask sitting in the bottling hall, because largely when we bottle Kalila, it's because we were doing a bottling of Portuguese, right? So we bottled Portuguese, we've bottled Portuguese since 2009. Like 8-year-old and 100 proof for roughly 50 casks in a batch. until COVID, what we used to do is rack up 50 casks at the warehouse, and I'd go up and I'd try them. We'd actually transfer about 60, and I just worked out that little bit of Yorkshire in me, that bit that makes every Scotsman look like an incredibly generous human being. Worked out it was significantly cheaper for me to fly to Glasgow, drink in the pot still with Julie, go to Dumbarton and taste all our casks, and then come home than requesting samples. Worked out that I could do that a lot cheaper. So what I'll do is I'll turn up when they were doing a bottle of Port Skeig, and we'll go through all the casks, and there'll be 50, 60 casks, and anything I really like, I just take out. So I go, okay, that's superb. Don't want to bottle that as Port Skeig. I'll bottle that as a single cask.
Maybe change that to being anything that's particularly outstanding, because you really like all of the casks that go into Port Skeig.
No, well, the stupid thing is, as you said earlier, you can't bottle bad Kalila. Bottling Port Skeig is the easiest bloody job in the world. I mean, anyone who says that's a challenge, put Kalila in a bottle at 8 years old, make it taste nice. Oof. So yeah,
you're dissing your own reputation here, Ollie. You need to stop doing this. This is a tough job that you have.
I've got a very easy job. I've just been very lucky. I said yes a lot. If you want my job, you just say yes a lot. In the wrong context, that could go very badly for you. Just
and occasionally has.
That's true. There's that story in Afghanistan that I don't want to go into. But in terms of this, it is a case of we're trying everything on site, and we go, okay, that's brilliant in and of itself, and then we put it to one side. And that's exactly what happens with reserve casks. We take a batch out of the parcel we've brought across, and we say, okay, well, this is slightly different, so we put it to one side and we bottle it. And for me, it's proper joy, because I believed when I was starting in whiskey retail and I first met the lovely Mr. Ludlow, I believed all bottling was like that. I thought that you just wandered up to warehouses and tried
and just chose.
I didn't realise it was all a horrible lie. Mark Watts thing in his house, drinking some bastards. I didn't realise that when you turned up to an actual whiskey warehouse that it was really cold and horrible and raining.
Unless you're in Taiwan.
He's tasted the same. I mean, so it's the closest I get to Scotch whiskey romance is bottling Kalila. I mean, that's my Scotch whiskey romance, and I do it in Dumbarton in an industrial estate.
I know it reasonably well.
You don't ever want to film.
We're a very loving nation, though. You don't, that just would suggest that no one's shown you the love anywhere else, Ollie.
I've been shown a lot of love in Scotland, just so it's but it's just not the romantic love that people think it is. No one's raising their kilt for me.
Are you requiring additional romantic love?
A Glasgow kiss, Phil's saying, well, he plays his cards right.
Phil's on it there. Now
that's why they've got a Glaswegian on staff now, just to take care of that kind of area. That
any
noise.
Funny.
That's it. No funny business.
You've got the right one. Now there are a few questions floating about, and I think probably the easiest thing to do is I'm going to let everyone in on the chat, and as long as they can behave themselves, and see what questions we've got. I mean, Jürgen has got a couple of questions, potentially for both of you. So I'm going to, Jürgen, I'm hoping you can hear me. So I'm going to, how do I bulk unmute everyone? I mean,
you can't. You have to allow them
no, I can't.
unmute themselves.
No, I've got unmute all here.
Yeah, but everyone has to unmute themselves.
Jürgen's loose. You've let me loose.
That's it.
You let me loose.
3.
If everyone
He's
can,
very romantic when he's loose.
if everyone can unmute their video as well, so we can see you, as long as you're not in a compromising position, obviously.
The more compromising, the better, though. That'll give us all something to talk about. So,
A question to Oliver and you, Julie. We just bought a cask. I'm a member of the Leeds Yorkshire Still Whisky Club, and we bought a cask from the White Peak Distillery, and they use active yeast and dry yeast. Are you aware of any other distillers using those both kinds of yeast, both active and dry?
I'm aware of quite a few distilleries who move from dried yeast to active yeast. Mainly it's to do with the economics of storing yeast more than anything else. There's probably more experiments now going on with yeast in terms of yeast strains, active yeast, dry yeast, etc., than there has been in the last 15, 20 years. Going back to my good friends at the Dornoch Distillery, who are definitely not listening to this, if you want to understand the wonders of yeast, it's worth dropping them a line. I mean, they'll tell you the beauty of using dead yeast, why you'd want to even mess around with what they buy, like casks of yeast where yeast has died, and they're like, well, yeah, but it changes the flavor. We're in a period of time probably now more than ever that flavor is driving production, certainly for small distillers, and that's why yeast is so key. I mean, because you've got to remember, since 1970, I want to say 73, might be wrong on my year there, someone will correct me. Since DCL created distiller's yeast, which was essentially a strain of yeast that was very efficient. We went from a period from then to now where everybody moved to one form of yeast. One thing did a job to make alcohol, and it did it very well, right? And I'm not knocking any of the spirits that were produced in that period, because frankly, if anyone's tried like 1983 Klein Leash or 1984 Kalila, which is frankly one of the best things in the world, that's all distiller's yeast, and it's a wonderful thing. Now we're in a day where everyone's looking for change. They're looking to be able to talk about what they do. Every distiller is looking for their thing that they can claim and say that they do differently. All of that's really interesting. The proof is in the drinking, because you can say yeast is the most important thing, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't taste nice, it doesn't fucking matter. Being really brutal. And you can make great whiskey using standard distiller's yeast, as has been proven by DCL on countless occasions. And you can make great whiskey using brewer's yeast moved in wood that died halfway on the journey and resulted in extended fermentation times, like Springbank, where they're using half the amount of yeast that anyone else does and fermenting for ridiculous amounts of time and reaching what I can't remember what the ABV of their beer is. It's about 4%, 5% or something stupid. So you got incredibly low gravities, and you get, again, an incredibly expressive spirit. It's just one part of a really wide puzzle. But geeks love to claim that one thing makes a difference. It's just one aspect.
Yeah, no, we just had some new make from this distiller, and it was the best new make I ever tried. I tried quite few from different places, but this was just amazing. Really sweet. It was just different.
Jürgen, if you like the new make, you're going to love the whiskey, and that is the only thing that's really changed for me, I think, radically. And what's really interesting about a lot of new distillers is the interest in new make quality versus end product.
Yeah. And my second question, I to Eddie or all of you is behind me is this little smokehouse, Port Ellen. We're talking about Carl Ila, and I love Isla. I love peated, but I think the peated whiskies hide so much others. You have all the other compounds in there which coming out. Like we tried the Glen Elgin tonight. That was my favorite. I really liked that.
Yeah.
He had something really interesting in there, and I like the peppery stuff and all the fruity nose, and like somebody says, fuzzy or fizzy, and it made me smile. So if you put some peat in there, you kill, I guess, most of that. And so wouldn't peat be taking away too much of the other goodies? Or what's your opinion?
I don't think so. I think that there are certain peaty whiskies, like young Islay whiskey is really peaty, and over time the cask will change that. But I do believe that you can taste underneath the smoke once you've developed a palate for peaty whiskey. I think you can taste underneath it. I think you're right, Glen Elgin, that really, really light, fruity, delicate, but who knows, like peat smoke might just make a really lovely change to Glen Elgin spirit, but you know.
But it, like you say, Julie, it's a quite complicated puzzle. So if you go back in time, there's this almost farcical argument that whiskey used to be smokier. And I've recently seen some fantastic bits of history, which is DCL's records of all of the phenol specs of the spirits they were buying and distilling. So if you can imagine that, that's DCL, who is now Diageo, who were buying from everyone. They had the peat specs, they had the phenol specs for every single distillery, probably in Scotland, outside of probably Glenfarclas. And one of the most interesting things is the phenol specs are actually a lot lower, right? So you get these people saying, oh, Lagavulin used to be more peaty. It didn't used to be more peaty. It used to be distilled differently, and then the phenols would show differently, and you'd get a different spirit, you get a different whiskey. So depending on how you've treated it, depends on what you get, depending on how you treated that spirit. And remember, a lot of the distilleries have been run a lot slower. They wouldn't have been run 7 days a week. They would have run 4 days.
The fermentation would have been longer as well.
Some of the fermentation would be longer. They would have done lots more longs than shorts.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. It's a really complex picture. Would phenols change Glen Elgin? Yes, but how would they change it? We don't really know.
Yeah. It might not be a bad thing though. Like it might not be in a bad way that it would change it. It might enhance it in some way. You know, it just.
Well, the other thing is Glen Elgin will be unlikely to have Islay peats in it, wouldn't it?
Well, of course, yeah.
Even some Islay whiskies are unlikely to Islay peat.
Yeah, that's right.
Nicholas, as an example, about 3 years ago was a pretty bad year for Islay in terms of peat because it was really wet. So everything was really wet, and it basically, if you've got a very wet season and a very hot season, your problem is that you can't get the smokes. So suddenly you've got to get the smokes from somewhere else. So you go buy your peat from the mainland. So, but the reality is no distiller is ever going to tell you that happened.
You know,
I don't even fucking know it happened. They bought Ellen, and Port Ellen not telling them. You know, we live in a world where we think everything's transparent. The actual brutal reality is most distillers don't understand why you even care. I mean, they're like, I'm making spirit. It tastes nice or it doesn't. And suddenly we're asking these questions and they're going, well,
they might just say, it's none of your business. Do you like it or not? That's it.
I mean, I think some of them would love to be able to say that. They got lots of young, you know, millennial marketeers who say we're not allowed to say that. Well, frankly, fuck off. It tastes nice or it doesn't. But,
Sharon, you were raising your hand there. Did you want to ask?
Oh, hold on, let me.
Is it though?
Sharon's not there, obviously, is she?
Vinny, have you got a question, mate?
Yeah. Hi, righty.
Hey, mate, you're right.
Julie.
Yeah.
When it comes to aging whiskey, and Oliver, when it comes to aging whiskey, do you find that some distilleries deal with the aging process better than others? I'm thinking of the Glenelgins and the Milton Duffs, you know, the gentler whiskies. So you put them in the cask and you give them 20 plus years. Whereas the Mortlasks and the heavier whiskies, they seem to hold their body, as it were. But your gentler whiskies really are influenced by the casks, and there's some very interesting complexities coming. Do you find that some distilleries age very well, better than others?
I suppose it's the weight of the spirit, isn't it, really? If it's a real heavy spirit, it's going to hold that longer than a lighter spirit will. A lighter spirit, the cask will kind of dampen that out quicker in a lighter spirit.
I guess it's exactly that. You've got heavier spirits age longer in richer wood, right? Because you can take on more of the compounds, but then you can take a spirit like Kalila that's distinctly light. Like Kalila is a very light, elegant spirit, although it's very smoky. Maybe this is why it's such a special spirit, because you've also got phenols, which are distinctly heavy compounds, and you get old Kalila and it's just elegant but fruity and smoky. And anyone who's had the distinct pleasure of drinking 1980s Kalila will tell you it's one of the best things you'll experience in your life. And I include the birth of my firstborn and like pretty much any great orgasm along with 1984 Kalila.
All of which are notated, obviously.
Definitely no.
But it is exactly that. So lighter spirits in a very active wood get overrun by the cask. They get overrun by the compounds from the wood, and suddenly you lose maybe some of the elegance in the spirit. And again, it's a personal thing. So some people love. I love spirit character. I adore what the distiller does, not just in whiskey. I love it in mezcal. I love it in, I love it in Calvados. I'm only just discovering Calvados. I could drink Calvados every day of my life. I think what the distillers are doing is amazing. Whereas if you've got a very heavy spirit, it's very rich. You can sit in wood for 30, 40 years and it sits there happily, just, bring it on. I've got more heavy compounds. I can feck with
I can take it. That's it.
And you take Glenfarclas, which is a distinctly heavy make, and you try it 60 years old, as I've been very lucky to do. And you can still taste the spirit, and you can taste all the wood, and you go, whatever spirit went into that cask was literally just sitting there going, yeah, bring it on. Go on. All your tannins, I've got that. I've got enough to take all of that.
But when it comes to developing tasting notes like Rancio and Dunwich Floor and mushroom, the fungus, those sort of lower base notes, is it a matter of luck with the cask, or is it a sort of marrying with a certain type of spirit and a certain type of cask?
My gut feeling is that it's more to do with spirit. So most of the times I found mushroomy notes, it tends to be in much heavier sulfuric spirits, like Lagavulin is a sulfuric spirit, Glenfarclas is a sulfuric spirit, Glendronach is a sulfuric spirit. If you try them off the still, it's like drinking earth. It's like drinking dirt. It's filth, like utter horrible filth. But if you give them enough time, they turn into that. Certainly mushrooms. Like anytime I drink aged Glenfarclas, like seriously aged Glenfarclas, I get that kind of nutty, almost and mushroomy note. and for me that's spirit led more than it wood led.
Yeah. We've got a young Mr. Watt, just new to the industry, who is wanting to ask you a question. Mark,
Right, you boy, what's your question?
No, Mark, I still don't remember what we did in Hong Kong together. I've got no memory of that night at all.
Mark, are you there?
In fairness, the yacht was very, very good in Hong Kong. No, what I was going to say, obviously, I haven't tried your whiskies tonight, but I know everything that you put your name to is amazing, and etc. etc. You were speaking earlier about yeast and stuff. Like, I grew up at a small distillery called Macallan when it was a small distillery, and they used to speak about having 4 different types of yeast. That was one of their big things, that 4 different types of yeast was their thing that made them different. Funnily enough, that got lost in the marketing these days, but that's beside the point. And that's not even got anything to do with my question. I was just having a bitch about yeast. But you're rightly saying you can run a still, any still, to distill. When I say still, I mean distillery, to produce whatever you want. If you run it this way, you run it that way, you do this, you do that. But if you look at a lot of the new distilleries, and I love them all, I love loads of them, well, hopefully some of them, but I love them all. But a lot of them are producing good spirit that's good young, so at 3, 4, 5 years old, it's really good. Do you think those spirits will be good at 10 years old, or do you think distilleries should do a batch of stuff that's like, this is our early release, and then we'll produce something different for our elder release? When I say elder, I mean 10, 12-year-old.
I think
are a lot of these people just pushing all the flavour into it now so that it sells and it's really good, and not thinking about the future?
I think if you were Japanese, you'd do exactly what you just said, and you'd say, right, I'll make some spirit for now, and I'll make some spirit that I'm going to leave for 5 years, and some that I'm going to leave for 15 years, and some, if you were Centauri, that's exactly what you'd fecking do. And I'm not going to lie, Alex Distillers, when we finally get to build a distillery, that's exactly what we will do. Because there are certain compounds, exactly like we were talking about earlier, in terms of your Glenfarclases and your Mortlacs, and there are certain compounds that age out better, right? And they create interesting spirits, they create interesting flavors. In terms of modern distilleries that are producing right now,
I love most of them, to be honest.
All right, from a commercial point of view, well, okay, so there's a big difference between your big Diageo distilleries who are producing a flavour profile based on what they've historically done. And historically is the last 30 years. Let's lie about it. It's not historically 100 years, because that's just bullshit. But your modern distilleries, your Jim Swan distilleries, they're making a whiskey they want to sell in a period of time because they're not stupid, right? They've got to make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. No one should ever hate for that. Will it taste great in 10 or 20 years' time? Honestly, Mark, I've got no idea. I don't think anyone does, because no one's made spirit the way that Jim Swan made it 20, 30, 40 years ago. No one's done that. So no one really knows what Kilhoman will taste like when it's 20 years old or 25 years old. I can tell you it's now.
It just all sells when it's like 3.5 days old, so it's fine. So.
I certainly think it's a really interesting, and
I just think it's quite an interesting thing. Like, how are these new distilleries going to age?
I had a conversation with one distiller from an English distillery, which I will not name, and they said to me, we had no plans to go more than 5 years. So they'd calculated everything they were making on this age point. This is what we bottle. This is what it tastes like. And that little bit of whiskey, the whiskey geek in me, that the man who buys silly bottles for no apparently good reason, because I hated it. It made me really upset. Like, it made me upset that they weren't laying down stock, going and thinking about what it would taste like. But I do think people like, again,
I think there's new distilleries and there's new distilleries. You can, well, I'm not going to name names because I don't want to end up in court again. But like, there are some distilleries that are spirit driven. You know, like the Dornoch Boys, etc. They're there because they want to make a good, etc. And there's other new distilleries that are there just to cash in, and you can quite easily see the difference between the two of them.
A lot of distilleries obviously want to make a brand and they want to sell it to a big company, and then they want to retire. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, you can't judge someone.
If someone wants to buy a brand that someone's bought up, that would be brilliant.
But I'm a great believer, I guess, in the same way I am with independent bottlers. I'd never buy from independent bottler that I couldn't imagine drinking with. Right. So for those that don't know, I've been drinking Adelphi all night. Right, I've not actually been drinking our stuff.
Adelphi is the great independent bottle.
I could drink with Alex Bruce. Right, I can imagine having many drams and being very happy. I drink a lot of. I used to buy a lot of Cadenhead stuff because I used to drink with the.
You can keep buying Cadenheads.
And my view is that if you don't drink, you shouldn't really be bottling anything. And I kind of feel distillers are the same. If you don't drink, you shouldn't really be distilling anything. And I certainly have a bigger trust in the distillers that I know that obsessively drink, like the boys at Dornoch. And you know, a lot of the new distilleries, if you care about what it tastes like at the end, you're going to care about what you're making now, and you're going to make a more interesting spirit. And you'll probably think about, will it taste nice at 3 years old? Will it taste nice at 10 years old? Will it taste nice at 15 years old? And then you might make changes for that.
Yep.
And you should.
Oliver, we did a tasting at Ardbeg. They had something called the PT Path. Don't know if it's still on. So they did a 7, 8, 9, and 10 years old from the same barrel. It's just aged. So we tried each, and 5 of us, we all had the same opinion. The 9-year were best, but the bottle that did 10. So
you know, so almost there, yeah.
Almost there, yeah.
I love that whiskey. Nothing to do with you, Ludlow. Just so we're clear. Love it despite you, not because of you.
I just drank a lot of it.
I drank my last bottle with you.
Well, I've got 1 or 2 more. It's fine. Has anyone got any further questions before we wrap this up? Because it is getting on a wee bit. So if you'd like to put your hand up or say anything, please do so now. No?
Good session. I really enjoyed that. Thanks, Eddie.
Oh, you're welcome. Welcome.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, well, listen, I think we've probably held on to these lovely people long enough. So I think we'll call it a day. But thanks everyone for tuning in and for investing in the tasting packs. It's still much appreciated, and I hope you've enjoyed this evening. It's been great fun.